Welcome to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. I believe every man has the potential to push past his limits and strive for something greater. Whether you're a former athlete who is looking for what's next, a professional pushing through the daily grind, or someone simply ready to break through life's toughest challenges, you're ready to step into the pursuit of something more. Your pursuit begins now. All right, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin, and today we have Chris Neumann joining us. And Chris, before we dive into your story, a few sports questions for you. First, favorite all-time sports team?
That would have to be the Milwaukee Bucks.
Oh, since you're from Milwaukee. Yeah,
from Milwaukee.
Figure that.
Yes. Yep.
How about your favorite all-time player?
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Kareem, yes, the legend.
Yes, listen to the Bucks on the radio when I was supposed to be going to bed when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. I used to listen to them and listen as long as I could until I fell asleep.
That's awesome. One highlight from high school or college playing hoops?
I would probably go back to high school where we set the all-time Division I consecutive win streak at 62. And I remember that vividly, the game that we set that record and what it meant for everyone.
And that was I know in Milwaukee,
that was at Dominican High School in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin.
And that leads right into you growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with your 11 brothers and sisters and how your dad was that driving force behind playing hoops. So share some of those highlights and challenges growing up.
Sure. Obviously, you're going to have some challenges when you have 11 brothers and sisters. We had a pretty modest 3-bedroom home. So there was 3 in each room, and the boys got relegated to the basement for their bedroom. We had a fairly structured life where dinner was always at a certain time, and you were going to be there, and you were going to eat what was on the table. If you didn't, you were going to go hungry. That's just the way it was. And it was right down to everybody had their own seat. And at times when the family was the largest and some of the older siblings hadn't moved out, we had 2 different tables that we were serving food on. And it was, like I said, it was very structured. You were happy to get the second pork chop if one was available, situation like that. And we lived in the inner city of Milwaukee, across the street from the projects, but we didn't know any better. And we didn't know that we weren't living upper middle class. We just knew what was around us. And fortunately, we had a lot of other families in the neighborhood that had 5, 6, 7 kids. And everything was about doing things with your friends outside. The old rule, be home by when the street light comes on. That was the rule. When we left the house, if we were over at somebody else's place, they were the parents. And I used to remember that if something happened at another house and we got scolded at another house, when we got home, we got it again. We got it a second time. You know, so the parents all were on the same page with how things were. So it was very fond memories, even though when I look back at it, so much more challenging than what I dealt with just having 2 kids of my own. I can't imagine my parents at night and why they didn't go completely psycho having all of those kids all the time.
And how about your dad? Your dad was this driving force behind you playing hoops.
Yeah, he was. My dad had coached I'm number 10 out of 12, and I'm the youngest boy out of 4. And my dad coached my older brothers in grade school at St. Stephen High School. And so I would go and I would just sit on the side and shoot hoops or goof around. And when you're there, you're picking up little pieces of this and that, and you're watching some of the drills. And so you're off to the side, and then you're playing your Kareem Jabbar or your Oscar Robertson or who you are as you're off to the side and you're playing games with yourself. And I think my dad saw that I maybe had a little bit more ability for the sport than maybe even some of my older brothers had. And I had size. I was always a pretty big kid. And so he took a special interest in my development. And he would do certain things during my time where I wasn't really sure if I was a good basketball player, and if I wasn't sure if I wanted to be in a gym 2 or 3 hours a day. He would do things to make sure that I was getting my time in on the basketball court before I was off gallivanting with my friends, playing kick the can or baseball or football or something else. And there were different things he would do. One year he would ground me to the house, and one summer, until I put an hour of basketball in on our hoop, which was on our garage. And once I put that hour in, then I could go on with the rest of my day. Then other years, he would make it a financial thing for me. And he would say, okay, you want to earn some money? If you put 2 hours a day in, I'll pay you $1.20. If you put an hour in, then we break even. If you decide you don't want to play that day, then you owe me $1.20. And at the end of the week, we would settle up. And obviously, if I was ever behind, and which I was from time to time, then I had to work it off with chores. But if I started to figure it out, which I did as the summer went on, and put my time in, I'd have some extra spending cash to go to the five and dime with, or do some things with my friends. So those were little tactics that he used as I was growing up to get me to put the time in. And then as I started putting the time in, I realized, hey, I'm pretty good at this. And I started enjoying it more. And he found that he didn't have to do those kinds of things, that I was just starting to put the time in on my own. And I'm very thankful. It seemed militant at the time, some of the things he did, but I'm very thankful now that he did those things.
Share with the listeners your experience now playing ball at Dominican High School, some kind of highlights and challenges where I know you were a JV player as a 10th grader, 11th, and then share with us as 11th grader, I believe you were like the 10th or 11th man, and then a starter as a 12th grader. So just share with us.
I was very late in developing versus a lot of my teammates. I was 5'10" and 120 pounds as a freshman in high school. I played on the freshman team. We had a very good freshman team. I think it was like 17-2. And one of the freshmen actually got brought up to varsity for the state tournament. The next year, another sophomore played varsity, as well as this other guy, Mark Moore. And I was playing JV. We only had freshman, JV, or varsity. So your sophomore year, you would play JV if you were going to play. And then my junior year, you either made the varsity team or you got cut. You weren't playing JV as a junior. I made the team. At that time, I was 6'2", and actually as a junior, I was 6'4" and 155 pounds. So I was a stick, to say the least. I could shoot the ball, but I couldn't move very well. Again, I was just real late in physically developing. So I was 11th man on the team. We went undefeated that year. And although I was 11th man, I was still practicing with some of the best players in the state, players that went on to Wisconsin and the University of Detroit and Nevada, Reno, players like that. So I was getting naturally better and better just playing against these guys. Those guys graduated my senior year. There were 6 seniors on the team, and we were the ones playing. As a matter of fact, our rotation was 6 deep. And I got a chance to start, improved greatly. I went from 155 pounds to 175 pounds between my junior and senior year, grew another inch, and started really taking off. And I ended up being the leading scorer on that team my senior year. And my senior year is when we set the state record at 62 wins. So it wasn't success that happened right away. It was, you put the time in and you waited and you were humble, and you were humbled a lot as you grew up and grew through that high school experience. But when you finally got there and you got your chance, I really made sure that I was going to make the most of it.
Share with the listeners now your decision, I assume during your senior year sometime, or maybe it was during the summertime, but I assume it was during the school year, decision to attend the University of Minnesota-Duluth, a Division II school in Minnesota. But why was it challenging making that decision? Any of the obstacles that came along the way? Because I know there was a school that was really interested in you, Northern Michigan, at that time.
Yeah, and actually, I first even started thinking about college basketball as we got through my senior year. My game kept improving to where college scouts were coming and looking at me. And I wanted to go to Northern Michigan University. I had my heart set on it. Our family had a very small cottage in the UP of Michigan. And so I got very familiar with that area. And Northern Michigan was one of the top Division II schools in the country back then. And they used to recruit out of Milwaukee. And my coach actually sent a letter up there saying, hey, I got a guy that wants to go to your school, and here's a tape of him, and what do you think? And they offered me a full ride based off the tape. I went up there and took my tour of the school. I ended up suiting up and playing with the guys. Everything seemed to be going pretty well. And while that was going on, there was University of Minnesota-Duluth started showing up as we were getting into the state tournament. And the head coach came and talked to me after one of the games at the state tournament. And one of our players, Nicky Johnson, went to Minnesota-Duluth the year before. He was our point guard for Dominican when I was a junior. And so he was up there and he was pushing for me to come up there and take a look. And I didn't have a lot of interest in it. I was so bent on going to Northern Michigan University. And I've had, obviously, through the years, high school especially, people that said that it's not going to happen for me, that I'm not going to do it, that I'm not going to be good enough. And, what basically happened, I went up to UMD and I said, just to appease my dad, yeah, I'll come see the school. We drove from Milwaukee up to Duluth, spent a couple days in Duluth. I hung out with Nicky and his friends, and we had a good old time. And then I suited up and I played with the guys that were on the team. And I think the situation was I didn't have a lot at stake, so I didn't feel any pressure. And I played great when we were playing pickup and everything. I just was playing really well. And I remember Coach Fisher, right after we got done, he gave me the scholarship. And Nicky Johnson was the only other UMD player that had a full ride. And he gave me the scholarship that was a full ride. And he said, here, I'm giving it to you right now. I wish you would sign it right this minute, but I understand if you want to think about it, but we want you. And I said, okay, I appreciate that. We drove right from Duluth to Northern Michigan. And the next day, I was supposed to be up at Northern Michigan to sign the letter of intent. And I drove up there. Our cabin was about an hour to hour and a half away from Marquette, Michigan. I drove up there. And at that time, the Coach Brown started saying that we're not sure how much financial resources we can give you. Our athletic department is going through some changes, and we'll have to see what we can and can't do for you. And my mind immediately went to he doesn't think I'm good enough. He doesn't think I can play. And I've heard that through going through high school, and it was just something that, okay, you don't think I can play. Oh, I get it. So I said, okay, when are you going to call me? He said, I'll call you Monday at 6:00. Monday at 6:00 came around. He didn't call. Monday at 7:00, I called George Fisher at UMD and said, I'm coming to UMD, signed the letter of intent. I had the scholarship, and I certainly wasn't going to let that one go by. And Coach Brown from Northern Michigan ended up calling me the next day and saying, we're going to probably have to pull back on the scholarship. And I said, hey, you don't have to go into all of your spiel. I already signed with Minnesota-Duluth. I didn't figure you wanted me. And he goes, we weren't sure. We had a couple of the guys that were on the line. And I said, okay, I understand. I said, maybe we'll get to see you down the road. And so that's how I ended up at UMD. And I made sure right when I showed up for school at UMD, I asked Coach Fisher, I said, would you do me a favor? Would you get Northern Michigan University on the schedule? Because those guys don't think I can play. And he said, yeah, I'll do my best. And we ended up getting those guys on the schedule a couple of times. And I was able to make my point to Coach Brown at Northern Michigan on the court. And that gave me a great sense of pride to be able to do that. But that's how I ended up at UMD.
And then kind of your experience at University of Minnesota-Duluth, and I know you play with Brian Hanson, or we would sometimes call him B, if he's going to be listening to this. And then just some kind of highlights and challenges. I know that you got an opportunity to play Northern Michigan a few times. I know some of the records you set. So just share with us in the next few minutes about just that experience set.
I found out when I went up to Minnesota-Duluth that Brian Hanson had been heavily recruited. He's from Duluth East, and he had been heavily recruited by UMD. Brian was the runner-up for Mr. Minnesota in 1980. The Mr. Minnesota went to Jim Peterson, who I'm sure a lot of people on this podcast will recognize that name. He's the color man for the Timberwolves right now. Brian Hanson was the runner-up to Mr. Minnesota, and actually those two went to Minnesota and roomed together. And so I found out after I got to UMD that I got the scholarship that Brian turned down because he went to Minnesota. And of course, I was very intrigued by that. And Brian wasn't going to school, didn't start for the University of Minnesota for 3 weeks after the school started up in Duluth. So Brian was hanging out at the gym doing the pickup games with all of us. And I got to play against Brian and compete against Brian. And it really told me and showed me where I was as a basketball player. And I felt like we were very close as far as our skill level and our competitiveness. And I made it a point to guard him every chance I could. Fast forward, he went to Minnesota. I went to UMD. I was fortunate enough to start from the very first game. My freshman year, I started every game and got a lot better as the season progressed. Brian went to Minnesota. And Brian didn't play a lot at Minnesota. And there were some factors, and I don't know all the factors of what made his decision, but he decided to come to UMD that next year. And so he transferred in the spring. And there were all kinds of, back then there was only newspapers, and the sports newspapers were reporting that Brian Hanson is coming to UMD. He'll be the starting guard. Chris Neumann will have to move to forward. And once again, I took it as, they don't think I'm good enough, that somebody else is going to now play in front of me. And Brian and I went hard at it that spring. And I could tell that I had improved from all of the live basketball that I played throughout that freshman year. And Brian was sitting the bench at Minnesota. And I felt like I had a little bit of edge on him at that time. I also found out what a great guy he was. And Brian Hanson and I, decided to move in together for our sophomore year. And we lived together for a couple of years. And Brian, to this day, is one of my very best friends that I have. I was the best man in his wedding. He stood up at my wedding. We just went on a cruise together just a few weeks ago. So we've been lifelong friends ever since. And it's interesting, that would have never happened had Brian taken the scholarship to UMD. I would have never been there. And now here we are, lifelong friends.
And then share with us, I know you would play Northern Michigan a few times to make sure you got them on your schedule. And I believe the first time you guys played them, but I remember your senior year against Northern Michigan. I think you shared with me a few weeks ago when we talked. And then I believe I also share with, I think in the Minnesota-Duluth, you're still in the top 5, I believe, in scoring as well.
Yes, the Northern Michigan thing, that's the old revenge. Revenge is very sweet at times. My sophomore year, we played them in Marquette, Michigan. They beat us pretty good, but I had a pretty good game. I remember I had 19 points or something like that. And it was against the guy that they had picked, basically took my scholarship. And I remember Coach Brown, I was very distraught that we lost the game. And Coach Brown made a point. He came up to me and then, hey, you're a heck of a player. We might have made a mistake, and I hope you have a great rest of your career. And I shook his hand, but in my head, it was like, you know what, I'm not buying any of that. I want to see you again. And finally, my senior year, they came to Duluth. It happened to be my 100th consecutive start, and we trounced them pretty good. And I had a very good game 20 some points or whatever. And I remember I caused a great amount of stress for him on the bench during that game, especially because I was having a good game. And I know that they did some planning for me and it wasn't working out the way that they had hoped. And I made sure to walk over to his bench and shake his hand and let him know, yeah, you did make a mistake. But you know what? As everything goes, this couldn't have turned out better for me. I started every game in college, which was at that time, I believe, was 115. I graduated as the third all-time leading scorer in UMD history, and what I'm most proud of, the all-time leader in shots attempted.
Mhm.
So there was never a shot I didn't like. I think currently I am number 5 in scoring all time, and I'm number 3 in shots attempted. I'm still up there in a couple of categories 30 years later.
When you think about being in the top 5, and at that time they didn't have the 3.
Didn't have the
They came in later.
didn't have the 30-second clock. And Roger, you know me, we played together for many years. I shoot from there. I can't imagine how many more points they could have scored with a 3-point line and a 30-second clock. And we had teams, when teams knew that they were going to get beat by us pretty good, they would run 4 corners on us. And they would try to take 3-4 minutes off the clock just to keep the score as low as possible. Yeah, I'm very proud of the fact that I'm still up there in some of those records, given that the game was a little bit different back then than it is now.
Share with us now, graduated from University of Minnesota-Duluth, and then how you kind of replied to a blind ad and began working for, I believe it's
Western States Envelope. Yeah, I was on the 5-year plan in college. I got through my 4 years of playing, and a new coach came in the next year, and I was fortunate enough that he hired me as an student assistant. I finished up my degree in printing graphic arts management. We moved back to Milwaukee, and that was 1985. And the job situation wasn't great in 1985. Jobs were a little hard to come by. So I was working at a grocery store, third shift, just stocking shelves, while I was every Sunday, I'd get the newspaper, get all of the ads for sales or for management, for sales trainees in printing companies and anything that had to do with graphic arts. And I was sending resumes out. I'm sure I sent a couple hundred resumes out during that time. And I answered a blind ad in near the end of August of 1985. Didn't know who the company was because it didn't say. It just said they're in the graphic arts industry. But that I'd have to be willing to relocate if possible. And so I went to the interview. It happened to be Western States Envelope. I did pretty well on the interview. They gave me the Wonderlic test. I did decent on that. But there was always something in the back of my head because I didn't know truly what I was going to be selling. And I had this vision of me going door to door with a box of envelopes, like an old encyclopedia salesman. I wasn't real sure that this was the job for me. But as they say, beggars can't be choosers. I really didn't have much else going. And I took the job, and 39 years will be 40 years, I believe, in September. The only job I've ever had out of college. And so thankful that I did answer that blind ad. And it's amazing how things work out sometimes.
Isn't that? And then you met your wife, you had kids along the way, and moving kind of on. I remember you share with the listeners we talked about this before, about winning, how to prepare to win, how that has impacted you in your work and also basketball and in life.
Yeah. My dad was real big on cliches. There was always a cliche. No matter what I would say, there was always a cliche he could come back with. And he said, the people that win, wanting to win is one thing, but wanting to prepare to win is all the difference in the world. And what he meant like that is this: just wanting to do something isn't going to be enough. You have to be willing to put in the work, and you have to understand that it's something you have to do every day if you want to be great at something. And those are the kinds of things that stuck with me. I remember another one was, I'm going to do this. And he'd always go, yeah, I know the dog was going to catch the rabbit, but he stopped to go to the bathroom. Gonna doesn't do anything. Potential never put a dime in anybody's pocket. He used to say, don't tell me what you're going to do at breakfast. He goes, let's sit down at dinner and you can tell me what you did. Because that's what I want to know is what you did. I don't want to know what you're going to do. And that kind of always stuck with me. And it embedded in me the need to have to do something and prepare every day. I remember in the off season in college, I would lift weights with the football team because lifting weights for basketball wasn't vogue back then, in the 80s. In fact, some people thought it would hurt your shot. So I was lifting with the football team. One year between my sophomore and junior year, I gained like 10 pounds of muscle. And it so improved my game. But I was willing to do those things, and I was the only guy on the basketball team doing it at the time. And so I think that's what is meant by being prepared to be great or prepared to be successful, is putting in the work. You can't just want to do it. You have to be willing to put in the work.
That's so good. Just that preparation and just a win in life. And well, share with us, just take about a minute and share with us your two sons that followed in your footsteps and both played at Cretin-Durham Hall, and then they both went on to play Division I basketball.
Yeah, I followed in my dad's footsteps and started coaching. I actually started coaching basketball before my kids were ready to play it. And both my kids, I'm 6'6", my wife is 5'10". I had a pretty good idea my kids are going to be tall. And they took to basketball. And so I was fortunate enough to coach them through grade school and then watch them as they went to Cretin-Durham Hall, and they had a lot of success at Cretin-Durham Hall. And then they both went on to play Division I basketball. My oldest son, CJ, he played at Wofford University in South Carolina. They went to the dance twice.
Remember that?
Sam ended up at Montana State, where he had an excellent career, 4-year career there. They both graduated in 4 years with degrees. And basketball gave them a lot. And basketball gave them the opportunity to get a college scholarship, to get a college degree, to go on and be successful in other things.
As we kind of move forward with this podcast, try to wrap it up in the next 3 or 4 minutes, share with the listeners, I know you experienced of prostate cancer and how you overcame that challenge and some of the challenges that go along with that.
The C word for anybody is very shocking, and it doesn't matter what type of cancer it is. That C word really gives you a jolt. And that's where you fall back on your family. And I was fortunate enough that there were people in my circle that went through it. One person in particular, Ed Cassidy, who you had on a former podcast, he went through it about a year before I did. And he was a great resource. In fact, he was the one that directed me to the surgeon that he used. And I'm very thankful for Eddie and his input there. And then you find out as you're going through this that a lot more people are going through it than you thought were going through it. And the more that you talk to people, I golf with my neighbor who's a dentist right across the driveway from me. And I found out during the round of golf that he had prostate cancer and he had the same surgeon that I did. And it's those kinds of things, being able to have other people to help you go through that and to have your family help you go through that. I think that's the driving force that gets you through. And I think that's what took a lot of the scare out of the situation is, hey, these other people went through it. They did okay. It'll be okay. And it was, and it is. So I'm very thankful for having that circle of friends and my family to help me through that.
And as we kind of wrap up, this would be a whole nother podcast about us playing hoops after college for the number of years. So I think that's going to be a separate podcast, but I played against you, Chris. I played with you for a number of years. And I just have to tell the audience, Chris is a legit player. If the three was at the University of Minnesota-Duluth when he was playing, he would be the all-time leading scorer at Duluth. There's no doubt in my mind. I remember, Chris, seeing you hit 6-7 threes in a row without missing. I'm like, this guy never misses. I thought I shot the ball well, and it's just feed it to Chris, let him spot up for three. I think he already had 6 in a row, so let's go for 7. But that'll be a whole nother podcast coming up in the near future. We just want to get to just some kind of final thoughts, Chris, that you can leave with men as they continue on their journey.
It's like everybody. Hopefully, everybody has some family, some friends, someone that they can lean on to help them along. Mentors are so wonderful. And I turn around and I try to be a mentor to other people because I've had a few mentors along the way. I had my coaches in high school. I had my father first and foremost. And then when I got to Western States, I had a man by the name of Mark Lemberger, who was the sales manager, who even when I was a little bit of a renegade when I got to, and a little bit immature when I got to work, that there were some people that didn't think that I should be around. And he had my back, and he just told me, just take that energy, all that energy you got, and all that competitive drive you have, and just go. And he goes, and I don't care. I'm not giving you a schematic. I just go. He goes, if you just let it go, you're going to be fine. You're going to be great. And I'm so very thankful for that. Always, if you have a chance to lean on some mentors, they mean so much to you. And they meant so much to me in my development. And now I just try to do the same thing, either through coaching. I became a manager for the company to help the other salespeople to turn around and pay it forward.
That's a wrap with Chris Neumann. I want to thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at mopandcoaching.com.